Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you, Todd. So, in short, my project is a collection of essays on international trade law and politics on these three topics that you see here. But more what I'd like to talk to you about today is the process of how I arrived at these three topics and how I arrived at having the knowledge and the ability to write these essays. And that is, I'd like to outline for you essentially my interest and my understanding of international trade law and policy today, which I then took and translated into these essays that you see here. So the content here is really specific, but the journey of getting to the specific content to me is more important to share with you. So to return to my title photo, which is these beautiful yellow cocoa pods, why did I choose this photo? Well, the answer is pretty simply that I love chocolate, and specifically I love chocolate cocoa beans from Central America and parts of North Africa. And a fascinating question to me is, how was I able to obtain this bar of chocolate, the beans for which were probably grown maybe 3,000 miles away? And the answer to that question is that there's a farmer, say in Ghana, who sold his cocoa beans to a broker, who then sold them to a processor, who then sold them to an exporter, who then shipped them probably 3,000 miles across the ocean, put them through customs, and the chain goes on, and sometimes that chain is really long. And the further question is, how is this bar of chocolate not prohibitively expensive for me after going through that long process? And the answer to that is that there's a system of international trade rules that govern how that process goes. Further, there's a United States-Ghana free trade agreement, and further, there's a complex system of subsidies and taxes and so on that serve to make this chocolate bar $3 and not $300. And so everything, like this chocolate bar, everything we touch, everything we eat, we buy, sell, or consume, is in some way a piece of this international trading system. And it's this system that brings this chocolate from field to hand. It's a system that determines the quantity and the quality of the food we eat, of the medicines we have access to, of the stuff that we use. And it's the system that determines why we in this room are relatively well off, while billions of others are caught in cycles of poverty. And in my time at COA, I found that I'm pretty much a big picture person. And so the idea of a connection from this overarching system to this bar of chocolate is a really attractive idea to me. So in my time at COA, oops, forgot that photo. In my time at COA, I have focused on these three systems of governance: the economic, the legal, and the political. And I've been aided in this study largely by Ken Klein, Dr. Doreen Stabinsky, and Dr. Davis Taylor. And I would actually situate international trade right at the intersection of these three systems, where it overlaps and contains elements of all three. And in my study of my senior project, I focused on two overarching themes, and one is the study of systems, and the other is the study of power. And it's these two that really compel me to study international trade. So with regard to the first, the study of systems, I've been looking at a major shift that has occurred in the international trading system as recently as the last couple of decades. And that system is characterized by these two photos, which will be explained shortly. So we've all heard of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in some capacity or the other. And it's an international organization that governs trade. It's comprised of members that are sovereign nations, 156 of them. And the shift in the trading system is that it is now moving, trade governance is now moving out of the halls of the WTO and into what we call bilateral or regional governance. So that is, instead of 156 countries in a room together deciding trade rules, we now have 2 or 3 or a few in many different places. And that effect is called the spaghetti bowl effect. And that's actually an academic term that's being increasingly used in scholarship around international trade. And it's kind of a funny picture, but the real life spaghetti bowl looks something more like this. And this is actually just a tiny fraction of the thousands and thousands of international trade agreements there are in effect today. And major players in this transition from the WTO to the spaghetti bowl are these guys, TNCs, transnational corporations. And through the spaghetti bowl effect, these corporations are given increased access to invest abroad, which is why I'll refer to them from now on as foreign investors. And while there are some positive aspects to this increased investment, my senior project was focusing on some very controversial aspects of this, and specifically three. And the first is something you may have heard of in the context of the North America Free Trade Agreement. And under NAFTA and following agreements, foreign investors, those corporations, were given rights to sue host country governments. And this is an important legal right that has had implications, often negative, for environmental health and safety regulations in the host countries. Another aspect is our access to drugs, often life-saving drugs, at an affordable price. And another is public services that are traditionally granted from governments to us, services like water and sanitation and education that are now increasingly being handed over to these foreign investors. So these three topics and others have been the focus of those three essays I mentioned earlier. So as I said, my essays deal with these broad topics, but I've done it from a certain angle. And this photo serves, or this map serves to explain a little bit about my angle. This is a map of the division of the world according to developed and developing economies. And as you can see, the blue is more developed economies, the orange and red are more developing ones. And while this map is an approximation, and there are always exceptions, in the international political arena, this division of the world into global north and global south is often representative of the reality in those negotiating rooms. And so my approach to the topics in these essays that I've written focuses sort of on the power play between these two halves of the world, one recently colonized, that is the global south, and one fully industrialized, the global north, in which we live. And in the trading system, these different groups of countries often have different interests to protect. Countries with, say, larger agricultural sectors need to protect the interests of their farmers, while countries with larger, say, financial sectors need to protect those investors that depend upon that sector. And so part of my project also focuses on this contrast and whose interests often win out. And in my experience and in international trade, it's often developed country interests that's due. And so I have focused on the implications for developing economies of this effect. I've had the great privilege to be able to see these politics play out in a real world arena. And this is a photo of a protest I participated in at the recent United Nations climate change negotiations. And here, a bunch of youth from around the world are doing an action that expresses solidarity with the developing country position in the talks. And we're calling for equality between global equity, not equality, between global north and global south. And so my senior project has reflected this journey of learning, and it's involved a lot of reading and writing, but it definitely couldn't have been possible without this practical aspect. And for that, I really have to give a heartfelt thanks to my mentor and project advisor, Dr. Doreen Stubinski. And so I hope to continue learning and doing the practical aspect of this as well as the academic aspect. And with that, any questions?